Welcome, Ondi. I'm so happy to have you. You are an incredible, world-acclaimed filmmaker, and you've been telling stories of resilience for many, many years. You're now in your own story of resilience after losing your home in the Altadena fires. And I'm honored to have you here to have a conversation about resilience, about rebuilding, and just hear some of your story and what you've learned from this process. So thank you for being here and welcome.
Thanks for having me, Charlene. And thanks for doing this. I mean, I think it's really important that we take stock of what happened here, it being the largest disaster of this kind in American history, and really figure out where to from here in terms of how to make a more sustainable world to live in and how to rely on each other and our communities and our local communities, and on ourselves. Like if you look at the watch duty map or some of these ways that people have been sort of improving their self-reliance in the wake of this, because my entire town burned down. Not entire, but 65-70% of Altadena burned down in a matter of hours, and no fire trucks were there. um, Apparently emergency services were overwhelmed by then, but also, wind was carrying embers 100, sometimes from 100 feet to a mile away. And it was impossible for the emergency workers to catch up. So they just evacuated. So, after owning this beautiful home that I had put everything I loved into, it burned to the ground. And I never imagined that that would happen in LA or outside of LA. So it was really a big awakening in that way to how fragile and impermanent even the most permanent seeming of structures and like of life. It was my home base. It was a sanctuary. And then to have it just kind of gone, it is hard for, I think, our human brains to really grasp all that at once and the level of loss.
Mhm.
Um,
Is
so
this?
a lot of that going on for me psychologically over the last month, and I think for LA as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and this is why I was inspired to create this. While I'm blessed to not have lost my home, I don't live in Los Angeles. I was watching it take so many of my friends and people that I love and know, my spiritual community, just watching it all burn and feeling the loss of that. And because I wasn't directly impacted by it, it also had me be able to start coordinating and think about some of these bigger questions around leadership and governance and how we steward and how we, some of the more systemic things, because I think when you're in it, you're just in the grief and the loss. But now it's been about a month. And so I'm curious to hear just a bit about your own journey, because oftentimes we see these crises, and many times we're privileged enough to not have them happen directly to us. And this was the closest to home experience that I've ever had, where it was hitting my community, a place that I lived, a place that I was planning to move back to this summer, and then just watching it disappear in a moment really confronts us. And so this was something that you directly experienced. And I'm curious just to hear a bit about the journey from when it first happened to now as you sit here, maybe harvesting some of the learnings and the journey of resilience, of grief and loss, and what you've kind of learned from that process.
So I lost my father 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, and that was the biggest experience of death that I ever had. And he died by medical aid and dying, and I actually filmed it and then it became a film called Last Flight Home. And so I actually, because we were processing it as we were going, because we expected it and we knew the day, because we could gather around him and share the love, the grief wasn't there in the same way that it is for me now. Um, I've never experienced death on so many levels as with the loss of our home, our town, our way of life. Really, my orientation point in the world. Like I travel constantly because of work and shooting all over the world. And I was in Europe like 200 days last year. I should mention that when the house burned down, I was flying from Rome to Budapest that morning, I woke up to my family being evacuated to my house from my mother's house, which is in Eaton Canyon, where the fire broke out. My brother said to me, forget about mom's house, that's gone. And took her to my house with the cats and her dog and his family. And it was apparently much calmer at my house and it was going to be fine. And she was even going to spend the night there. There were no evacuation notices even given in Altadena, in that part of Altadena. Never, people ran for their lives at 3:30 in the morning. So even that aspect of our emergency services, or like our response, was not in place. And I was 7,000 miles away or something and just trying to make a plane and just trying to find a place to send my family. Who would take 5 adults and 7 animals, you know? But yeah, the loss of everything in that house, right? From my archives, all of my films, all the underlying films, all of like the footage that made up Last Flight Home. I can't make another version of that, you know, or I can't make another version of Coming Clean or Brand: A Second Coming about Russell Brand. There was footage of David Lynch. There was interviews and footage at his meditation center in Iowa that's, you know, gone forever. I had had a minor office fire in May of last year. So usually we keep duplicates in our business. But because of that, I had moved all the most important archives and photographs and everything and footage to my home. So now they all
Mm.
burned. So it was kind of like this. It makes me feel like this is supposed to be happening to me and that this is some kind of test of impermanence and of acceptance of impermanence. And, you know, that like I go between acceptance and thinking this is something that, look, we can't take anything with us when we leave this place. We're all going to die. We're all going to lose people we love. We're all going to experience massive, massive, unfathomable loss in our lives. I'm just having a death in the middle of my life. You know what I mean? I'm having one of everything I've ever created practically. Um, that's physical. Everything I've ever attained. So all my awards, you know, there were awards all over the house, you know, probably like 50 awards or so, like in different rooms and everything. They're just gone. Um, but the thing that hurts the most is the cards from my son, where he would draw our life together. And every birthday and every Mother's Day, I would get one of these, and it would be whatever show we were watching, and it would be dialogue bubbles, you know, of like whatever we were talking about, and training the dog, and learning to drive, and everything of his childhood, all of his own artwork, and all of the cards we ever exchanged, and all of the journals I ever kept for 50 years of my life, you know, like, which I did keep. Even the last one, which was the last 2.5 years of my life, I left by my bed for safekeeping because it had 7 pages left, you know. So it's that kind of stuff that wakes you up in the night. And that's been the hardest thing, is sleeping, and nightmares about things burning, or I'm putting on shoes and going out in my dream. And then I wake up because I realize that those don't exist. And in fact, all the clothing I'm wearing doesn't exist. And then I picture it burning. You know, it's that kind of trauma that we have to work through. And that's part of resilience, is taking time to to give yourself space and, um, receive, be gentle, right? The opposite of fire is what I've come to realize. It's the opposite of fire is what we need right now. We need to be really open and receiving and really gentle with each other, and also community, you know, a global community like we're talking right now. And we're sharing with people, hopefully all over the place, that are wanting to feel tethered and connected to the experience and the trauma that's happened in LA, which is an unprecedented volume of trauma. And I think, yeah, connecting to community, and the community has been like the silver lining. You know,
Mm.
it's like, yeah, I have nothing left physically, except my body, which is so important to take care of right now. And then also my community and the respect and love and just support that I have somehow managed to garner from all of the work I've done and all of the kindness I've shown others in my life is all coming back to me. It is like being going with the death metaphor. It's like being alive for your own funeral in a lot of ways. It's kind of like this unbelievable experience of like, I didn't realize how much I meant to people. I didn't realize how much my work has meant to people. And people have come out of the woodwork saying, you helped me finish my movie. Can I pick you up some luggage? Can I open my home to you? You help me, do this. You influenced me to have my father do medical aid in dying, like things like that I'm just like, I wasn't aware of, or I never sat with them and heard this, but people want to reflect it back to me now. The GoFundMe that we have, it has, so I had all this cash in my house. I had a fireproof safe and I kept like $110,000 cash. And you might think that's crazy. And my one friend of mine joked, like, what are you, the mafia? But like anytime ever anybody ever paid me in cash my entire life, I kept it. I didn't put it in the bank because I always thought maybe like when the apocalypse came, it would be like banks wouldn't be open and or they'd be emptied or they'd be hacked. And so it'd be nice to have like a head start of cash. So I had a lot of cash that had just built up over the time, and it all burned, right? The fireproof safe totally burned. And so, the GoFundMe has almost replaced that.
Mm.
And I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask for my friends to set that up. So it's really beautiful to see the best part of humanity, how we can come together, the donation centers, people that I don't even know that have gone and collected clothing for me and my family. That's resilience on a community level, I think. And that's so important to us. It's really kept us going, to be honest. It's kept our spirits going. So
It's been a huge theme of all the conversations is community and relationship and how there is no resilience without relational resilience. And such a beautiful sentiment that you just shared that you've been giving your whole life has been giving, creating, giving, telling stories, telling inspiring stories, touching people. And now that's coming back to you. And sometimes when we give, we don't always necessarily feel it immediately returned or returned from the same person. And we rarely have any idea the actual impact we have, the ripple of impact. I was saying the same thing to Yara, who connected us because he's this weaver and community builder. He has a sense of some of the projects that he's helped initiate, but most of us have no idea the lives that we actually touch and how even just saying one thing, someone could hear one thing in this conversation, it can change the way they lead, the way they parent. And so I love that you're experiencing that, the come around. You've been giving, 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 and now you're experiencing some of that come around. And while it's amidst immense loss, I also want to celebrate you for being in the loss and the grief of that, while also seeing the beauty and being willing to have that perspective of, well, what's the goodness that's coming and happening here.
yeah, I think that, they say, is it destruction and opportunity or bedfellows? Um, I was talking with my wife yet last night about doing this conversation with you and what do we think? And she said, it's like the same thing. You either when you face the unknown, you can either be scared or excited,
Mm.
right? And it's about kind of trying your best to stay excited and stay with what excites you. What gives us the spark? What are the little things that give us joy and excitement? And really try not to focus on the big picture because the big picture can be very overwhelming. Where are we going to live? Like right now, we're in a friend's home in Joshua Tree. We'll be going back to another friend's home in Culver City. When we first had this happen, a friend gave us a home that they owned to land in for a little bit, but then it had been, it was rented out. So we're moving around. We're like living this sort of nomadic lifestyle, and it gets scary when you're like, where are we going to be in May? Then we're moving to New York in March, to another friend's home who we can stay in their apartment for the maintenance fees. It's like we don't know where we want to live because we loved Altadena and there was nothing like it. We had these live peacocks that were running around in the front yard. You'd open the door and there'd be this insane mating dance happening, or they'd be in the tree and flying over the house at sunset. And we'd go around the block and see our neighbors, and they'd be walking their dog, and we'd all go, under these deodora pines. And you didn't feel like you were in LA. It wasn't like this concrete jungle. It wasn't tiny cram streets, winding through hills. No, it was really beautiful. And it was just a dream. And I don't really like anywhere else in LA like that. And it's very painful to be in LA and not be able to go home. But of
Mhm.
course, I love many people there, and including my mother. And by the way, my brother's home, which was a mile south of mine, also burned to the ground that night. So my
Wow.
mother and I was isolated without her two children living right up the road. It was this idyllic life where we had electric bikes and we could ride down to my brother's and we could ride to my mom's, and we were all together. And my mom didn't feel so lonely after the death of my father with us around. Also, my mother, when she evacuated to my house, evacuated with two cats and her dog, and one of the cats perished in the fire. Who
Mhm.
was, her best buddy, Rosebud, named after me. And so there's a lot of loss that she's experiencing. So being in LA is important, but it's also very painful to be in LA and not be able to go home. So we want to be very intentional about where we're going to live, but it's all about not making decisions in the middle of this grief, right? Like let the dust settle,
Mhm.
try things out. Right now we're in the desert. I love Joshua Tree. It allows me to I wanted to come here, and thanks to our friends, we have this beautiful home to be in for the week. And I can see the big sky, and I can see the rocks, and I can start to just come back into feeling some stability in myself. And in my family. And that's all we have right now. We don't have that place to go back to. So it's really important, I think, to just say, well, what's going to help me right now with my work, with my writing. I'm in the middle of shooting a movie about the Holocaust, which is what I was filming in Europe when the house burned down. And I have reenactments for that in Budapest in at the end of March. And so there's a lot of prep. I just got off a bunch of Zooms this morning about our shoot days and with our actors. And I, by the way, kept shooting when, speaking of resilience, when the house burned down, we didn't know because the map never updated because nobody was there to update the map. That's how Watch Duty works. So even the next day after we found out the house burned down, the map didn't update. Um, but we walked into our hotel room after scouting locations in Hungary. After flying from Rome, we went to Budapest. Somewhere in that afternoon, the house burned down in the middle of the night in LA. Then we walked into our hotel room for just to take a quick shower before meeting the production designer. And I looked at my phone, and my neighbor wrote me, and he said that our other neighbor had been hosing his house down because he's a former firefighter, and then he saw both of our houses burned down. So that's how I found out. And I said, "Babe, our house didn't make it." And she was just like started crying, and I didn't cry. I was just kind of in shock. But I realized the next morning, I had an interview with a Holocaust survivor who had been re-traumatized by going to this concentration camp in
Mm.
Stutthof, which is actually outside of Germany. It was the first concentration camp the Nazis built outside of Germany. Terrible place. And he had been there as a boy, obviously, because it's like practically nobody is from that time is alive anymore. So he was 6 when he was liberated. But he had to experience his father being murdered at that camp. And so coming back there really re-traumatized him. And so I wanted to end his story positively. So we were going to Vienna on our way back to shoot in Italy the very next morning just to film him at home, having lived his life in his home, drinking a beer, eating a sardine, his favorite, which some people had given him when he was a child in that camp. He tasted a sardine, and he loved sardines. And so I just wanted to show like there is no justice for what they did, killing 6 million people in 6 years, but for the people that survived, that they got to live. That's the only comeuppance that there is that they didn't quite succeed in wiping every Jew off the planet, right? So I wasn't going to cancel that interview. Like, even though my house burned down, I had to figure out how to do this interview. So we, of course, didn't sleep that night, cried all night, got on a train to Vienna, and the production company said, "Do you want to cancel the rest of the shoot? Your house just burned down. We totally understand. By the way, my producer's house also burned down. So now we have brother's house burned down, producer's house burned down, my wife's father's house burned down, and my best friend's house burned down in Palisades in Malibu, all the same day." So we're just kind of like reeling from all that. But I said, "Look, I'm not going to cancel on Joseph, but once I do this interview, I'll let you know if I can continue." So I thought, if I'm not doing my best work, I'll cancel Italy. And I went ahead, and it was not only a great interview, it really helped me,
Mm,
to
perspective.
really hear his perspective on his life. And we focused on the Jewish ghetto of Lodz, in Poland, and, you know, watching children being separated from their parents, but also how he played with this ball he made out of rubber or something, like, just hearing his resourceful way of surviving something so much worse than one's house burning down. There's nothing worse than being in a concentration camp, really, and having your entire family wiped away, and your entire world wiped away. And so it just was like, I finished the interview and I said, let's just keep going. This is what else do I have? And plus, everything else is destroyed. So I may as well create something, right? Like, I'm in the process of creation. Yeah. And that's kind of, I think, the biggest thing is, like, my whole career has been about the unknown. Documentary filmmaking is so much about not knowing what you're going to film. You go into a situation, it unfolds, and you have to kind of follow the story for sometimes years. Like, my most successful films are 7 years in the making, 10 years in the making. Those are the ones that won Sundance. Those are the ones that are in the Museum of Modern Art. My new film, All God's Children, is 5 years in the making, and so rewarding because you're following something over time and you have no idea where it's going to end up. And so you get to take the audience on that ride. Once you go back and edit it, you can recreate the serendipity for people. Well, now I'm in it, right? I'm in this film. This is the film about my own life being completely turned upside down and where to from here. And I have to get comfortable with applying that philosophy, which I've allowed to dictate, and I've practiced so much in my work, and that has yielded such good results, and try to practice that right now in my life. Right. So that's kind of how I'm structuring my journey of resilience, or actually prosilience, which is coming out with something even better. How can we live even better than we did before, right? How can we build something better? How can we live in a place that how can we just be so intentional about what we're doing right now? And that's the chance that I have. That's the opportunity that we have here. So,
I love that as a frame, and it's how you started sharing, right? Is that I could see this as an opportunity that this is happening for me. While it's not easy, it's not what I prefer, it's not what I thought I wanted. Can I be reborn, and can my life and everything I create and touch actually be better? And can the community be better? And while there's absolutely loss, and there's some things that will want to be rebuilt, the things that we're working, but maybe there's new things that get to be refined and expressed newly. And I love that perspective. And so I just want to underline a few things that you said about your resilience journey. One is this perspective is how do we rebuild even better resilience? What's the opportunity here? Continuing to create, right? Continuing to serve. I think many people went into a total freeze response, which is a reasonable response with such a trauma. And yet you kept creating, which keeps energy moving, which I believe in. When we serve, I believe it keeps us resilient actually, because then we're not only centered on ourselves, we're actually still centered outward and on service. And then, things keep flowing and moving. You also spoke about focusing on what's right in front of you. So while you're creating, you're also not trying to make huge, big decisions. There's big decisions to make, and those are overwhelming sometimes, even when you're in the best state of mind. And so I think it's a lesson no matter what, is just like, okay, can you focus on what's right here and don't make decisions or try to ruminate on decision making when you're in a state of stress or grief or overwhelm. Wait till you have that clear perspective, the clear horizon, and then consider the big things. And in the meantime, I heard you say you're experimenting. You're like, all right, well, the old life as I knew it is dead. So there's a new one that I get to build and rebirth. I get to bring some of it forward, and also it's a new moment. So with the trying new places, I hear that you're in this kind of experimentation and allowing the mystery and the unknown to, I'm sure at moments still feels probably overwhelming. And your practice, it sounds like, is to embrace it, just like you have in all of your art making.
Yeah, I think that was wonderful summary. I mean, I think we have a blank slate now. You know, we didn't ask for it. I would have taken some things out. I really, there is naturally regret. There's naturally grief. And, my sister, who's this brilliant rabbi who is on sabbatical, thankfully, right now in South America. So she has time to call and grief counsel my brother and me and my mom and everybody. One thing that she shared with me that I think I'll offer to you is that, you know, it's not, it is akin apparently to losing a life partner. This level of losing a home is apparently, according to, grief experts, it is death on so many levels. So it's so difficult. There are so many aspects to the loss. It's impossible to actually hold it all at once. So the grief comes in waves and it's much bigger than we are. And so I would feel ridiculous because I just continued. I just kept going. Right. I think it was much easier for me to do that because I was already in production. I already had I would have to cancel. I had actors lined up. I had
Mhm.
interviews lined up. So whenever I was doing those things and focused, it would take my mind off it. And as soon as it stopped, I would just start crying again or freak out. Or, I have all these films coming out right now. I have like 3 films coming out right now. So I went straight from
Wow.
from Italy to New York. And as soon as I got on the plane, I realized that I was doing the artwork list. Oh, by the way, those lists, the property list for insurance, is like the most inhumane thing. If you've lost your house, and the insurance commissioner of California has written a letter to try to make insurance companies just pay out what you insured your house for, whatever your property was, because listing what you've lost on top of having lost it, is can really be triggering. And so what happened was I was sat down on the plane and we were going to divide and conquer. And I started with the artwork and I listed all this artwork. Oh, this beautiful artwork that I had in the house. And I got to my bathroom and I thought, oh, you don't have any artwork in the bathroom. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I was like, what's on the walls? And you mentally scan your bathroom walls. Oh my gosh, it's all these cards from all of Shuki from my son's growing up. And that's when I just like gutturally cried. And then I think my biggest cry was Delta brought me a box of tissues. They didn't know what to do with me, but I cried the entire way to New York to open my film Dig Double X. And I showed up for those Q&As, and during those Q&As, during those 30-minute Q&As, I forgot about the fact that I lost his cards, and then came back to LA and there was the Santa Barbara Film Festival. We had All God's Children there. And I felt I felt bad. And I said to my sister, I feel bad because I'm starting to cry like at dinner with friends. I'm crying at times when it's not privately me in my airplane seat and it's spilling over. And she just corrected me. And she's like, you have a certain amount of tears and they all have to come out. And so you got to let them out. And grief is way bigger than you are, it's really not something that you can control. So all of this to say that all of the things that we're sharing right now about how to move forward, how to stay creative or be intentional, or that it is a blank slate, or to really get comfortable with the unknown, I think is the biggest thing, to just be comfortable with the unknown, because guess what? That's the truth, right? All that is the truth. And
And
that's
more than
all in
ever,
my
it's always
stronger
been the
self.
truth. It's always
That
been the
is
truth.
always the truth for all of us,
But
right?
this year and
None
these
of
times
us
will
know.
be
And
more
what?
than ever for the world.
What?
I think these
But
times we're in will be more uncertain than ever for the world. And people, there's never been certainty, but there's an illusion of certainty. And I think this moment is confronting with the reality that we don't know what the future holds. And all we can do is do our best to help shape it and create it and be adaptable when change does come. And so you've been kind of training this in your art for all these years. Can you speak to, and sometimes it's hard to name these things of it's a nice idea to be adaptable, to move with to embrace the uncertainty, to trust the uncertainty that's coming. As an artist, you've learned to trust that you don't know exactly where it's going to go. You just keep listening, right, and following. And so maybe you can share as an artist, as a filmmaker, because it might actually inform how people navigate these times in life. When you think about embracing the unknown and trusting that there's something greater on the other side of uncertainty and unknown that you can even see, like that's some of the mental frame that you've shared. What does that actually look like? Like, what do you tell yourself? How do you, is it a process of listening? Like, tell us a little bit about your creative processes. I actually think it's relevant here for how you navigate crisis and change.
Sure. I think it's, I think that one thing that I always say to younger people when they're starting out in their careers is to be comfortable with not knowing is vital to freelance, right? You can't hope to be a director, producer, entrepreneur without understanding that you just need to be nimble and pivot and that for me the darkest hour is right before the dawn. So it doesn't matter to me, like at this point, having made so many movies, there's always the part where I don't actually know if it's good. And I actually think it might not be. And it actually might be terrible. And worse yet, I have no idea if I've like ever made a movie before because I have no idea what I'm doing right now. And that is always when something comes in and I receive something that is like an epiphany or investment comes through, or it's just right before the lights are going to go out. And you just have to trust it and walk through that dark forest. And it just, I don't know why that is, but it's true. I mean, I don't know what else to say, except it's happened every time. I put in the hard work, I show up, I try my hardest, I hit a wall, and something comes in that moment. And I know so many creative people that say the same thing. So that's got to be true. And I think that is true. The other thing is, again, we don't know what the bigger picture is. So when things are happening to us, wow, why is this happening to us? This is horrible. And some people totally don't get their fair share. I know a woman who lost a child. This is worse pain than losing a life partner. This is worse pain than losing a house. This is worse than anything. I think it takes the cake as losing a child. Lost a child to a violent death and then lost her home. So now all of her memories of this child, the child's room, everything is gone, right? I cannot say to this person, well, you know, you don't know why this is, but it's all going to be for the best. Like, no, that is an undue amount of suffering for anyone. But I am currently making a film about a couple. They wrote All Quiet on the Western Front. The one that's on Netflix. They swept the Oscars and the BAFTAs and decided to pursue adapting a screenplay, Man's Search for Meaning, adapting a book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which is one of the greatest books ever. And it turns out it's a foundational book for the power of positive thinking movement overall, because he said, we really can't find happiness. He's an Austrian psychologist who was in Auschwitz and then also in Dachau. And he studied people in concentration camps. And here we are back to the Holocaust again. Um, he said, there are three ways to find meaning. There is only one way to find happiness, and that is through meaning, right? And there's only three ways to find meaning, and that's through work, love, or suffering. And suffering is how we reach our highest human potential. So all I can think is that this incredible woman who lost her child and now her home um, is probably going to be she already was one of the wisest people that I knew on earth, but she's probably a prophet of some kind or something. Do you know what I mean? Like she's suffering more than anyone should have to in their lifetime. And I think that looking at suffering as an opportunity is super important right now. What can we do with this? How do you turn lemons into lemonade? As soon as I flip the switch in my brain and I go from the feeling the loss and the grief to how can I turn this into a win somehow, I immediately start plotting and planning and thinking of opportunities and thinking of exploration and thinking of places I wanted to visit and thinking of friends I want to see and thinking of all the things that can fill a life, that I want to be very intentional about what I bring in, but I also, yeah, want to stay open to all of that. And I think that that's the key is we don't know what's going to we don't know why it's happening at the time, but there is another side. We will come out that other side. We have to know that change is constant and we will look back and just like my greatest films, be able to make meaning and sense of the chaos we're feeling right now. And it's in that meaning that we will find our joy again. And even now, finding some meaning in this will give us some modicum of joy, I think, and our ability to just laugh. We're still laughing, right, through our tears. So
There's so much wisdom that you've just shared. One is that grief comes in waves, and it does. And I lost my father in 2013. And what's interesting is right after he died, I actually felt relief. I was prepared for his death. I was his caretaker. It was not a planned like your father. But then in a way, I was free. And so it's like I had already done the grieving. But then just last week, after the fires came, actually, just last week, all these years later, grief about my father hit me. And so grief comes in waves. And I think that's beautiful and sacred because it also opens our heart. It can cause you to shut down and be tense to the world, or like what you're saying, our suffering can actually give us meaning, can open our hearts to be able to connect more, make us wiser. And one of my spiritual teachers, he was actually just speaking about the metaphor of the crucifixion and the resurrection, and how when you decide to serve life, to serve love, to be a spiritual being, when you have the commitment to be the best version of yourself, whatever your kind of version of that commitment looks like, then when the challenges come, they are your opportunities to refine you, and that they are required and needed, and that to the level that you're willing to serve is sometimes the level of the challenge and suffering you'll have, not because you've done anything wrong or even because you're being tested per se, but because it's going to actually make you better able to serve with more heart and compassion and empathy and care. And so I certainly have the prayer that the people that are navigating this, that as they navigate their grief in whatever way they do, because there is not one way to grieve, but that I know that the art that you make will be even richer and that the life you create will be even more beautiful because what I know from loss and grief is there's this quality of appreciation that returns us back to presence, right? I imagine that
your
there's
presence is a really, yeah, presence is something that I felt so much in the room when my father in his last days. And I think that many people who, the other film we have coming out right now is called The In Between, INN between, like an in between life and death. And it's the only hospice for the homeless in the country. We made this film because we just wanted the model to replicate everywhere. It's a brilliant, brilliant place where people who have been on the streets are facing a terminal, diagnosis. They come to this place supposedly to die in a warm bed, which is already what we should be doing for people, obviously, but so many people die on the streets. But there's over 600,000 homeless people in this country. Now there's 50,000 more in LA, and a lot of people that are these new climate refugees, people like me, we have community already because I'm lucky. I have community because I'm in the film community and I've made films that people can watch. And that's the other thing is that the fire couldn't burn my films that are in the on Amazon or Netflix, you know. So so it was very comforting to show up for these Q&As and see my film Dig XX on screen.
Then not
I was like,
everything burnt. Yeah.
you can't get that. It's right there, you know. So
Done.
that was cool. I'm very lucky that way. And so just realizing like I even joked with somebody, I said, I'm the luckiest unlucky person. You know, I feel very fortunate that way. Whereas what I'm trying to get to is that the in between, they come in and it's actually an uplifting film about homelessness because they're not homeless when you meet them in this film. And they're not really even dying, a lot of them. Their symptoms are reversing because they're getting basic care and basic dignity. But more than anything, they're getting community. And that has never been that is the revelation I have from all of this more than anything else is the importance of community, and realizing and reinventing community, how we come together for each other and how we can find safety in community. Like for me, safety has been taken. It was, when I was 9.5 years old, my father had a stroke from his neck being cracked in a massage. It was a freak accident, and he ended up paralyzed for the next 40 years. He lost the airline he created. He was bankrupted. He went through life feeling like a failure. And it was only in those last weeks that he realized that he gave us everything because he gave us unconditional love and he released the shame he had been holding. This is all in my movie Last Flight Home, by the way, which you can see on Paramount Plus if you're curious, or Amazon. But that story, right, is something that has defined my entire life. And here I am now, 52, and my house just burned down. My brother's house burned down. My town burned down. The post office, the pet store, the hardware store, the bank, my favorite restaurant, they're gone, right? I went away on a trip on January 4th and there was nothing to come back to, right? Except the community. You know, the community is still there. You're still there. We're all still here on the Zoom. And my neighbors from, my neighborhood that I loved walking around and seeing in the neighborhood, they can't go home either, but we're going to visit. We're visiting for dinner and crying together and laughing together. And you can't take that friendship away. You can't, fire can't burn that. And the new relationships that are forming with people that, like I said, are going to grab us clothing that we never even asked for, that are coming over to wherever we're staying to see if the shoes will fit. You know, people that we're meeting through this documentary we've been making just now about the fires, because everybody's like, "You're making a film about the fire, right?" And I'm like, "Well, okay. I mean, I'm trying to get I have 5 insurance claims that I have to deal with, but yes, I'll make a film about the fire." So I figured I may as well film now what is happening, and actually the community has been a big part of it. Like the way that people are coming together, strangers that have never met, that are digging through each other's rubble to try to find anything that's left, um, that kind of human resilience and that love that can happen almost spontaneously between strangers. There's nothing to replace that feeling. There's no big house that can give you that feeling, you know? Nothing that
Yeah.
you make, no money that you make, nothing can give you that feeling. And that's what the people in the in between feel. That's turning their symptoms up, stopping terminal cancer, And that's what I'm saying is like, that's the key. When I'm thinking about where do we want to live, we're like, well, I guess we could live in rural, wherever, but we're also like realizing, wait, when we say we're going to New York, people are offering me edit bays. People are saying, come to Shabbat dinner. People are saying, the community, like people are showing up with duffel bags. It's just like, yeah, I don't want to separate from that. I got to be close to my people. And
Community is more important than probably anything and more important than ever. I had my own revelation of this last year, kind of the year before, when I returned home after 4 months of travel to my house being full of toxic mold, and I had to emergency move out and throw away almost everything. So not as dramatic as a fire, but it was my own, it was my place. I lived alone in this big, beautiful home with all this nature. And then after that, because I unexpectedly had to move out, I spent the next year basically staying with friends from house to house in different places. And while being nomadic comes with some challenges, what I realized in that year was that there's nothing more precious than intimacy with people I love. And I'd rather be in a home with people than in my own big, beautiful house out alone in nature. And it was a really important learning. And so it was my own version of like, wow, like even now I live with a housemate rather than alone because I'd rather live with somebody that I love. And I'm a single woman, so
Mm.
having a friend around. And so it's been really on my mind lately. And when we think about resilience, community is certainly a big part of that. Christopher Breedlove will be up next speaking about that. And so just to wrap up this conversation, since this has become such a clear awareness and something that you're so appreciative of as community, is there anything that you'll do differently or think about in terms of relationship and community as you move forward after having this experience of realizing, wow, this really is so valuable and so important?
This is not the end, and fire, like all of the elements, is so powerful, and we are so tiny, and we are so powerless in a lot of ways against the forces of nature. And nature is so important to us. And I made a film about climate change in 2010 called Cool It that had a big release, and no one wanted to know these solutions and no one wanted to implement them. And at this point, we're at a tipping point, and now it's about adaptation, but it is really important to put the power lines under the ground and to rebuild on a big level with intelligence. And that is not happening. That is not happening. We don't have the right administration for that right now. But also going back to see the rubble of my house and getting past the National Guard and those tanks and finding them putting the power lines back up above ground was infuriating, because our fire was caused by Southern California Edison having the power lines above ground. So it's just, you know, it is really equally frustrating to see humans make these mistakes again and again and again and just it's like penny wise, pound foolish, that saying, just so short sighted, cutting corners, and so I
Not learning
urge.
from our mistakes, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I,
Like
I
crazy.
noticed them putting black asphalt down a couple of years ago, and I got all civic and got up on my next door and was like, everybody, we can't be, why are we putting black asphalt? Like the temperature's rising, and now that's really the least of our problems in Altadena, but certainly the power lines above ground makes no sense. And I just wanted to say one last thing, which is this is not the end. I want to end on a hopeful note and say that when we went back to the rubble, the wind was blowing, and it was so. I sent you some images that maybe you can share with people when you put this up online of the house so they can see really what it looks like. Um, However, there was one thing that survived. Nothing survived. Not the safe, nothing, the fireproof safe, all the money's gone, everything's burned, burned, burned. One thing survived, and it was my father's cotton robe from the 1970s when he raised us. He would wear it all the time. It was on him all the time. And I tried to wear it because I loved it so much, but I couldn't wear it. So I tried to convince my son to wear it. Somehow it ended up in his bathroom. And I don't know how, because we had cleaned the bathroom for our dog sitter to come and watch the dogs when we were away. So I don't remember it being there, but there it was in the only standing part of the house. There was just the enclosure of my son's shower, and hanging from it on a hook was a perfectly untouched cotton robe from my father that has survived the fire. And we're talking 100-mile-an-hour winds. Everything else in the bathroom's destroyed. There's nothing left. And this piece of fabric. And I just want everyone to know that, to me, and I hope to you, it's a sign that, yeah, my father said 1,000 times he'd be watching over us. And you think, I hope that's true. And I think it was his message to say, this is a little more powerful than something I could handle, but I'm here. I'm still here with you. Um and maybe, as a friend of my mother's offered to her, maybe he left that there to say that he took Rosebud home, you know?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and that he'll watch over you as you build this fresh life. Thank you so much for sharing some of your story and giving us a look into your current experience and heart and sharing your wisdom. How can people connect with you? What are the films coming out? Just how would you like for people to engage with you beyond this?
So I'm just my name at Ondi Timoner on Instagram, on X, although I don't know if we should all be on X anymore. Facebook also sometimes. I don't look that much, but DMing me on Instagram is a good way. And then Interloper Films is our company, and All God's Children is a film that is making a huge impact right now. It's playing in LA coming up and in New York. I put all these things on my story all the time. It's playing at Noy House in New York if you're interested. So is The In Between when we move there in March. So All God's Children is about my sister's temple's union with this Black Baptist church to try to stop racism and anti-Semitism in Brooklyn. And it's really another model of how we can have dialogue and actually partnership across all difference. And so both The In Between and All God's Children are these models that we wanted to put out in the world that will be inspiring for people. And All God's Children is a very tumultuous, dramatic ride, but well worth seeing. And so that's All God's Film on Instagram, and it's doing the festival circuit. So it'll be in Boulder, Colorado, and in Miami International Film Festival is doing a big retrospective on my work that I'll be attending in April with the family. They'll do Last Flight Home there as well. So there's all that. And then Dig Double X is opening in theaters all over the place. That in my link tree, which you can get to in my bio on Instagram. And I think on my website, there's some schedule and there's the GoFundMe for us. There's the schedule for Dig's openings. Dig is playing this weekend in LA, which is why I'm still in the LA area. I need to support that. And All God's Children is playing Hollywood on the 27th. So we get to leave at the end of those Q&As. But yeah, thanks for asking, Charlene, and thanks so much for doing this and having me on today.
It was a joy and a pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm really thankful to be connected again. Shout out to Yara with Hatch Community and weaving us together. And I want to bring on another friend of yours now, Christopher Breedlove, to build on this conversation. Bless you in this journey that you're on. And I'm going to come to New York and see some of this art. So I'm going to follow up with you.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Hi, Christopher.
Hi, Andy.
I'll let you take over. Good to see you.
Nice